the library that knows you. A Tranquil Arc Chronicles original. Good evening, and welcome back to Tranquil Arc Chronicles, endless horrors for sleepless nights. Tonight, the wind carries the scent of rain and forgotten paper. You can almost hear it, the faint rustle of old pages turning somewhere in the dark. There are no streetlights on this road, only the half-hearted glow of a single lamp flickering at the corner, the kind that hums like it remembers brighter days. They say there's a place that appears only when you're truly alone, not just lonely, but emptied. When the ache in your chest grows too heavy to name, and your shadow walks half a step ahead of you as though trying to leave. That's when it finds you. A door you've never noticed before. A building where none should be. A library that smells of ink, dust, and something faintly human. It does not exist on any map. It does not appear in the day. It knows your name before you speak it, and every book upon its shelves knows you too. So, settle in. The hour grows late, and the rain has begun to fall. Let's turn the first page together. Chapter 1 whispers between pages. It was raining again. Not the kind of rain that cleanses a city, but the kind that lingers, thin, gray, and indecisive. Each droplet traced lazy streaks down the cracked windows of Rohan Vale's apartment, distorting the world outside into watercolor shapes. He sat on the edge of his unmade bed, watching the city lights flicker through the blur of the storm. He hadn't spoken to anyone in days. Rowan was 33, though he looked older. His eyes carried that quiet exhaustion, particular to people who have forgotten how to dream. Once, he had been a teacher, the kind who read poems aloud to empty classrooms and waited for someone, anyone, to feel what he felt. But the layoffs had come like an avalanche, and in the months since, his world had quietly collapsed into a narrow corridor between sleep and waking. He reached for the radio on his nightstand, but it only hissed static. The hum of loneliness filled the apartment like a living thing. Even the clock on the wall seemed tired, its second hand twitching as though reluctant to move forward. And then, just as the clock's hands met at midnight, Rowan heard it. A knock, soft, singular, not from the front door, but from the hallway window. He froze. His apartment was on the 4th floor. There was no balcony, no ledge, nothing but open air beyond that glass. For a long, fragile moment, he told himself it was the wind, the rain, anything ordinary. But then the knock came again, precise this time, deliberate. When he gathered the courage to look, he saw it, a shape behind the fogged glass, tall, indistinct, but human, and pressed against the pane, an envelope. He hesitated before opening the window, but something in him, some curious hunger, compelled his hand. Cold rain spilled into the room as he took the letter. The paper was thick, vellum-like, with no return address. Only his name, written in a looping, unfamiliar hand. Rowan Vale. He tore it open. Inside, a single card, stamped with faded ink, to those who seek what's been forgotten. The library welcomes you. No address, no signature, only a faint symbol embossed beneath the words. An open eye formed from ink stains. Rowan laughed under his breath. A prank, he murmured, though his voice lacked conviction. But when he blinked, something changed in the window's reflection. Behind him, where his bedroom door should have been, now stood another door entirely, carved wood, ornate, with iron hinges and a handle shaped like a quill. The kind of door you only find in dreams. He turned slowly, the rain outside muted, as though the world had held its breath. When his hand touched the handle, warmth bloomed beneath his fingers, and from beyond the threshold came a sound, the faint, rhythmic rustle of pages turning. Rowan stepped through. The air inside was thick with age. The smell of parchment, candle smoke, and rain damp would fill his lungs. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched upward into darkness, so tall they vanished beyond sight. Each shelf flickered in the half-light, as though the books themselves breathed. No librarian, no desk, no visible door behind him. The world he'd come from had dissolved completely. He wandered between aisles, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. Every so often, he'd see movement, a flicker of shadow, the faint sweep of a coat at the edge of his vision. Yet, when he turned, there was nothing. One book caught his eye. It was bound in crimson leather, resting on a pedestal beneath a dome of glass. A placard beneath it reads simply, "For Rowan Vale." His throat tightened. Slowly, he lifted the dome. The instant his hand brushed the cover, his pulse stuttered. The title was embossed in gold, "The Unwritten Days." He opened it and froze. The first page contained a photograph. Him standing in the same apartment, the same window, holding the same letter. The photo hadn't been taken more than 5 minutes ago. He turned the next page. There, written in delicate handwriting, was a full paragraph describing his thoughts from moments earlier, his doubt, his loneliness, his disbelief, word for word. The ink was still wet. Rowan's breath came fast. He flipped further, seeing events yet to happen. Him walking, reading, speaking words he had not yet said. Then the words began to fade, replaced by a question scrawled in darker ink. "Do you wish to know more?" He let the book fall shut. From the corner of the room, a voice spoke, soft, genderless, and close. "Most do." Rowan spun around. A figure stood behind the next shelf, cloaked in shadow, its outline trembling slightly, as though it wasn't fully there. "Who are you?" Rowan asked. "The librarian," it replied. "You were expected." He tried to steady his breath. "How? Did you know my name?" The figure tilted its head. "The library knows you. it always has. It listens to what people do not say aloud. Its tone wasn't cruel. If anything, it was calm, compassionate, like a teacher explaining a truth long forgotten. Rowan took a step back. Is this a dream? The librarian smiled. Dreams are stories that haven't learned how to read themselves. It motioned to the book. Each book here holds a life, yours too. But be careful, Rowan Vale. The more you read, the more you will owe. All knowledge has a cost, even your own. Before Rowan could respond, a soft tremor passed through the shelves. Books rustled like restless birds. Somewhere deep in the library, a bell chimed once, long, resonant, mournful. The librarian turned toward the sound. They are calling, it said, the others who've come before you. Then, before Rowan could speak again, the figure faded, melting into shadow, leaving only the scent of ink behind. He stood alone, the library's silence pressed against his ears. The red book pulsed faintly on the pedestal like a heartbeat. When he turned to leave, he realized something terrifying. The path he'd come from no longer existed. The shelves had rearranged themselves, forming new corridors. The ceiling arched higher, swallowing light. Rowan walked, calling out, but his voice returned only as a whisper from behind the books. Rowan Vale, you opened your story. Will you dare to finish it? He followed the whisper, trembling. Every aisle looked identical, yet subtly different, like reflections in a fractured mirror. Some books bled ink. Some exhaled faint steam when touched. One shelf held only empty covers, their titles burned away. At the end of a long corridor, he found a mirror, or perhaps not a mirror, but a pane of black glass. His reflection looked back, but older, more worn, and smiling faintly. Then, from the reflection's hand, a book appeared, not in his, but in its grasp. The reflection opened it, and he watched, frozen, as the written words glowed. He is still searching for a way out. Rowan's breath hitched. Stop, he whispered. The reflection didn't. It turned the next page, and the next, until the ink began to bleed down the glass, forming a single sentence that ran like blood. He will not find one. Rowan stumbled backward, the mirror cracking from within. When he blinked, the reflection was gone, and in its place, a single open door at the far end of the corridor. Light spilled through it, warm, golden, almost hopeful. He stepped toward it, desperate. But the moment his hand reached the frame, a voice, gentle, familiar, whispered near his ear, "Not yet." The door slammed shut. The library fell silent again, save for the faint flutter of pages and the distant sound of someone weeping. Rowan turned. A small table had appeared near him. Upon it, another book, smaller, worn, its spine frayed with use. This one bore no name. He hesitated, then opened it. The first line read, "There was a man who entered a library seeking an answer." But what he found instead was himself reading from the last page of his life. And beneath that, in smaller letters, he is not alone. Rowan's hand trembled as he closed the book. The shelves seemed to breathe around him, their whispers gathering like wind in the rafters. He whispered to the air, voice breaking, "What do you want from me?" The answer came softly from everywhere and nowhere at once, only to be known, and in knowing, to keep you forever. The light dimmed, the sound of turning pages swelled like a storm, and in that moment, Rowan understood the library did not lend books, it collected readers. Chapter 2. The Librarian Without Eyes. When Rowan awoke, he wasn't sure if he had slept or simply lost consciousness. The library around him was dimmer now, the golden glow replaced by a heavy, dust-colored haze that made the air feel thick and unmoving. Somewhere above, something creaked like an ancient beam settling under its own memory. He sat up slowly. The table before him was gone, along with the nameless book. The shelves had shifted again. Where there had once been straight aisles, now stood a maze of archways, twisting into impossible geometries. The library was rearranging itself, like it was dreaming while awake. A low hum drifted through the silence, faint and rhythmic, almost like breathing. Rowan turned toward the sound. Between the aisles, faint motes of light hovered, fireflies caught in amber air. They pulsed in time with the hum, leading deeper into the labyrinth of shelves. He followed. Each step echoed like a whisper through the floorboards, though the sound never traveled far. The deeper he went, the more the books began to change. Some had spines that pulsed faintly. Others appeared to twitch when he passed, like creatures pretending to sleep. He tried not to look too closely. After what felt like hours, he reached a clearing, an atrium of sorts, circular, with a tall lectern at its center. On the lectern lay an enormous open book, its pages blank, fluttering as if turned by invisible hands. Behind it, the librarian stood. Only now, Rowan saw it clearly. Its robes were woven from scraps of parchment, the words printed on them fading and reforming as though being rewritten in real time. Its hands were long, fingers jointed in too many places, and its face, God's, its face was smooth, featureless, like paper stretched over bone. Where eyes should have been, there were only two faint indentations, as though once there had been sight, but it had been erased. Rowan froze. The librarian, tilted its head, the sound of dry paper rustling. You returned. I didn't know I'd left, he murmured. In this place, even thought can take you elsewhere. You drift between your words like a leaf upon a sentence. Rowan frowned. I don't understand. The librarian's hand moved across the air. The blank book before it rippled, and words began to bloom upon the pages. His name, his memories, fragments of dialogue from his past. You came seeking to be known, the librarian said softly. You opened the first page, and the library listened. It wrote you down. Every heartbeat, every hesitation, every truth you've hidden from yourself. Rowan's throat tightened. Why? What does it want? The librarian turned the page. To complete you. He took a cautious step closer. And what does that mean? The librarian's hand hovered over the book. Its voice became almost kind. Knowledge has a price. The library reveals only in proportion to what is surrendered. You may ask a question, Rowan Vale, one truth you wish to see written. But for every secret revealed, something of yours must be left behind. Rowan's pulse quickened. Left behind. The librarian inclined its head. A memory, perhaps, a feeling, a piece of your name. Each book balances itself. He stared at the massive tome, at the way the ink shimmered faintly, like oil on water. His rational mind told him to walk away, to find a door, any door, back to the world he knew. But that world had been colorless, hollow, and this one, for all its dread, saw him. What if I refuse? He asked. The librarian smiled, a small, patient curve in its formless face. You already read the first line. The story will continue whether you turn the page or not. Rowan's hands trembled. His thoughts swirled, of his mother's voice fading into the hospital's mechanical hum, of the students he'd once taught, their faces already half forgotten, of the silence that had devoured his apartment. There were so many things he didn't know about himself, any more holes in his life that no memory could fill. What happens, he whispered, if I ask to know why I was chosen? The librarian stilled. The pages stopped fluttering. That, it said, is a question that costs dearly. I don't care. Then sit. A chair materialized behind him, wooden, carved, ancient. When he sat, the library dimmed until only the book remained illuminated. Place your hand upon the page, the librarian instructed. He did. The paper was warm, almost living. Now speak your question aloud. He swallowed hard. Why me? The book exhaled. That was the only word for it, a long, sighing breath, as the ink beneath his palm began to move, forming letters that crawled across the surface like veins. Because you are the unwritten one. The librarian's voice came softer now. You have lived a life without author. You drifted between years unseen. You filled journals no one read. The library finds those who vanish within themselves, the lonely, the invisible, the forgotten. It gathers them so their stories will not die unspoken. Rowan's hand tightened against the page. You make it sound like mercy. It is, said the librarian, until it isn't. The lights flickered around them. The shelves seemed to lean closer, listening. The air grew colder, heavy with that faint scent of rain and old paper. Rowan whispered, "What do you want me to do?" "Read," said the librarian. "And remember." It turned the next page, and the ink surged like liquid shadow. Images began to form: a classroom, sunlight, laughter. Rowan saw himself younger, standing before his students, reading aloud. He could hear their voices, feel the warmth of their presence. For a moment, he was there again. Then, without warning, the laughter warped, the faces blurred, the sunlight dimmed into ash-gray light. The voices became murmurs, mocking, whispering. He's talking to himself again. He thinks the poems mean something. No wonder he's alone. The scene collapsed. The pages bled black. Rowan jerked his hand away, gasping. The librarian watched, unmoving. "What was that?" he cried. "The truth beneath your memory," it replied. "The library shows not what you remember, but what you refuse to see." He stood abruptly. "No, that isn't real." The librarian tilted its head, the faintest sadness in its voice. "Reality is only what a soul refuses to edit." The shelves around him shifted again. Somewhere in the distance, a child began to hum off-key, repeating the same 3 notes. Rowan turned toward the sound, heart pounding. "Who's there?" he called. The humming stopped. Then, softly, "Rowan." He froze. It was his mother's voice. He stumbled forward, down a narrowing corridor, chasing the sound through twisting aisles. The smell of dust thickened. At the corridor's end stood a small reading nook, an old rocking chair. A candle burned down to its wick, and a book resting open on a side table. The pages were covered in neat handwriting, not printed, not typed, but written by hand. He recognized the loops of the letters instantly. It was his mother's script. The title on the first page read, "My Son's Quiet World." He felt his knees weaken. "No," he whispered. She never, but she had. The memory came back like a blade. The journals she'd kept. The way she'd written about him when he was too quiet, too withdrawn, too unlike the other children. He touched the page. Her words stared back at him. "He doesn't speak much, but sometimes I think he hears things others don't. Sometimes I catch him listening to the walls." A tear slid down his cheek. "Stop." The words shifted. The ink rearranged. "He's talking to them again. He says there's a man made of paper who knows his name." Rowan stumbled backward. No, that's not possible. "I never." From the shadows behind him, the librarian's voice whispered, "The library has always known you, Rowan. Even as a child, you heard its call. Every lonely one does." He turned, but the librarian was no longer there. Only the faint smell of burning parchment. Then the candle beside the chair flared, its flame elongating, twisting into the shape of an eye. "Ask your next question," it whispered. Rowan's heart pounded. His voice broke. "What did she give you?" The flame flickered. The eye closed. Her voice, the candle, went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Only the whisper of pages turning remained, a slow, rhythmic sound, steady as breathing. He ran. The corridors stretched endlessly now, the shelves closing like jaws. Everywhere he turned, books whispered his name, overlapping in chorus. His pulse thundered in his ears. He came upon another door, smaller, wooden, half open. A faint golden light spilled through. He pushed it open. Inside was a study, simple, elegant, a desk, a chair, and a wall of windows overlooking an endless storm. Upon the desk sat a single object, a quill made of bone. Beside it, a note in that same elegant script. Every reader must write once. He stared at it. The quill shimmered faintly, the inkpot beside it black as night. He reached for it, and as soon as his fingers brushed the handle, pain bloomed through his arm. Ink, warm and alive, crawled beneath his skin, tracing veins like black lightning. He screamed. The air thickened with whispers, thousands of voices, overlapping, hissing, crying, praying. The librarian's voice rose above them, calm, immutable. Now you will begin to give back what was taken. Rowan staggered, gripping his arm as the ink etched symbols across his flesh. Each one pulsed with memory, his mother's voice, a student's laughter, the sound of rain. With every mark, another piece of him dimmed. "Stop," he gasped. "Please stop." The librarian appeared again, standing across the desk. "Do you wish to unknow?" He nodded frantically. The librarian leaned closer. "Then you will forget. But forgetting does not heal. It hollows." Before he could answer, its hand brushed his forehead. Everything went white. When the light faded, Rowan stood once more in the library's atrium. The massive book on the lectern lay closed. The librarian was gone. He looked at his hands, clean, no ink, no marks. For a fleeting moment, he thought it had all been a dream. But then he realized he couldn't remember his mother's name, not her voice, not her face, nothing. Only the faint scent of ink lingered, and the whisper of a library that now knew him more intimately than he knew himself. Chapter 3. The index of the lost the library had changed. Rowan, no, Evelyn still struggled with the memory of the ink under her skin, the ghost of her mother's voice fading from her mind. Every corridor she turned, every shelf she passed, seemed to pulse with life, as if the walls themselves remembered every reader who had wandered through. And yet, despite the library's constant hum, a new quiet had settled in, a heavy silence that pressed against her chest. It was in that silence that she first noticed the door. It was smaller than the others she had seen, hidden in a shadowed alcove behind a shelf that had not existed moments before. The frame was carved from dark wood, almost black in the dim light, and at the center, a brass plate read, "The Index of the Lost." Evelyn's breath caught. She did not know what she expected to find. Another book, another corridor, another illusion, but not this. Not a room that promised a catalog of lives, of stories abandoned and forgotten. The door creaked when she pushed it open. and the air inside was heavier, warmer, scented with old paper and something darker, almost metallic. The light here was faint, amber, like the library itself had dimmed to let her eyes adjust. She stepped inside cautiously. The room was vast. Rows upon rows of filing cabinets stretched endlessly in perfect lines. Each drawer was labeled with names, some familiar, some not. Some bore dates, birth and death. Others simply a series of numbers, meaningless until read in context. The sound of paper shifting and scratching filled the space as though the room itself was breathing. Evelyn approached a drawer at random. She tugged it open. Inside lay a small book, bound in faded leather, brittle to the touch. She lifted it and hesitated. On the cover, written in gold leaf, were the initials E.W., her initials. Her heart raced. She had thought that the library had already collected her story, had already written it in crimson ink that pulsed like a living thing. And yet here, in this index, her own life sat catalogued and waiting. The first page fell open under her fingers. Words scrawled themselves across it. She is here again. She comes seeking answers. She does not yet understand the cost. Evelyn swallowed hard. She had a moment of clarity. She was no longer a visitor in this library. She was an exhibit, a story in its collection. And worse, she had only scratched the surface of what it could show her. The sound of movement made her whirl around in the shadows. Between cabinets, a figure emerged. It was the librarian, but different. The featureless face seemed to shimmer, as though the void of its eyes had deepened. Its robes moved without wind, the edges curling like the tips of burned pages. It gestured to the index around them. "These are the lost," it said, "those whose stories were never read, never completed, never acknowledged. They sought escape from loneliness, from obscurity, from memory itself. The library preserves them." Evelyn's voice trembled. "And me, I'm one of them." The librarian's head tilted. "You were not lost. You were hidden. You sought the library, and in doing so, you became known. But knowing is not free. Every reader leaves something behind. Every page you open demands a balance." She wanted to turn away, but curiosity, that fatal curiosity, held her in place. She opened another drawer, picking a name almost at random, J.M. 1923 to 1975. Inside lay a tiny book, much like her own, but its pages were brittle, yellowed. She opened it, and immediately the room around her shifted. She was no longer in the index. She was in a house she did not recognize, filled with sunlight and laughter. A man sat in a rocking chair, reading aloud to a small child. Evelyn could hear the words, feel the warmth, smell the bread baking in the kitchen. And then the light dimmed, the laughter warped. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. The child's eyes grew hollow. The man's smile twisted into a grimace. Words formed in the air like smoke. He forgot them. He forgot the people he loved. He left them behind, and the library remembered. Evelyn gasped and slammed the book shut. She stumbled back, pressing herself against the nearest cabinet. The librarian was beside her, silent, watching. "Do you understand?" it asked. I don't know," she admitted. "Why show me this?" "Because you must understand the weight of being remembered. Every secret, every life, every memory, it has a ledger. And once you open the page, you belong to it as surely as it belongs to you." Evelyn's pulse thundered. "I didn't choose this." The librarian's hand hovered above her shoulder. "No, but you did choose to return. You did choose to look, and every choice here is binding." Another drawer opened itself, silently. Inside, another book lay waiting, its leather soft and unassuming. Evelyn hesitated, then lifted it. The moment her fingers brushed the cover, the room shifted again. She was standing in a foggy street she recognized, her childhood neighborhood, empty, silent, every window dark. She could hear whispers in the mist, voices she had loved and lost, friends she had forgotten, promises she had broken, dreams she had abandoned. Her own voice echoed back at her from the fog. "I didn't mean to forget. I didn't. A chill ran down her spine. The book in her hands was trembling. The pages fluttered, writing themselves as she watched. Evelyn Ward has carried this solitude for too long. She has hidden behind work, behind routine, behind silence. But the library knows her, and it will not let her go until she faces it all." Evelyn dropped the book. It hit the floor, flipping open, and a cold wind rose from the pages, scattering dust and ash across the floor. She backed away, her chest heaving. The librarian spoke, its voice calm and unyielding. "The index is not punishment, it is revelation. Those who resist forget what is necessary. Those who read must pay the price of knowing." "What price?" she whispered. The librarian extended a featureless hand toward a cabinet. One drawer slid open on its own. Inside lay dozens of small, empty books, each bound in faded leather. "These are yours to fill, if you are willing. But every page you take from the index must be balanced, a memory, a thought, a piece of your own life. Without balance, the story cannot exist, and the library will take what it must to complete it." Evelyn staggered back. The weight of the library pressed down on her. She realized now that every step she had taken, every page she had read, had been part of a transaction, and she had no idea how much of herself she had already given. A whisper came from behind the shelves. She turned and saw shadows, moving fleeting glimpses of other readers. Lost within the stacks, their faces pale and drained, their eyes hollow. Some held books, others simply wandered, and all of them looked at her with the same unspoken warning: "Do not linger too long." Evelyn clenched her fists. She had come seeking answers, seeking the comfort of understanding herself. Instead, she had found the cost of knowledge, and she had not yet begun to pay it. The librarian's voice broke the silence. Do you understand now why the index exists? Yes, Evelyn said softly. I understand. Good, it replied. Then you may begin. But remember this, the library does not forgive hesitation. And the moment you take the first page, your story belongs to it as much as it belongs to you. Evelyn swallowed. She reached for the nearest drawer, her hand shaking. The moment her fingers brushed the brass handle, a single line of ink appeared on the nearest blank book. Every story has a beginning, every reader has a cost, and every life leaves its mark. And with that, she understood there was no turning back. The library had found her, it had known her, and now it would never let her leave untouched. Chapter 4: Rooms that Rearrange Themselves. Evelyn's hands still trembled from the encounter in the index room. The weight of the library pressed down on her like an invisible tide, and her thoughts swirled in confusion, fear, and something that dangerously resembled curiosity. She knew she should leave, run back into the rain-soaked streets, escape the walls of endless shelves that seemed to stretch and bend impossibly above her head. But her feet would not obey. They carried her deeper. The corridor before her had changed while she had been in the index. She had passed it moments ago, but now the walls were closer together, narrowing, like the library itself was aware of her hesitation and guiding her forward. Faint whispers brushed the edges of her hearing. She could not distinguish words, only the cadence of language, as if the library were murmuring secrets just beyond comprehension. Every step she took caused the walls to ripple slightly, the floorboards bending as if they were liquid. When she reached out to steady herself against a shelf, it shifted under her fingers, extending and contracting in subtle movements that were almost imperceptible. She stumbled, but regained her balance, realizing with a sinking sense that the library was alive, not metaphorically, but literally. The air itself pulsed with thought and purpose. The soft glow of the sconces flickered along the walls, casting shadows that were longer than they should have been. Shapes appeared in them, contorted and impossible, half-formed figures that resembled people she once knew and places she had long forgotten. They moved when she wasn't looking, always on the periphery of vision. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and yet they remained, like reflections of memories she could not place. A whisper called her name again, Evelyn. It was low, intimate, familiar. She spun in place, but saw nothing. The library seemed to shift in response, shelves sliding closer, the floor slanting subtly. She felt as if she were standing in water, struggling to maintain footing against a current only she could sense. At the end of the corridor, a doorway appeared. It had not been there before. The frame was carved with intricate symbols she did not recognize. When she approached, the door opened on its own with a faint creak, revealing a vast room that defied all sense of geometry. Inside, shelves rose impossibly high, tapering into darkness. Ladders leaned against walls that did not exist when viewed from certain angles. Tables floated slightly above the floor, their contents open books, loose pages, ink pots suspended in midair, spinning slowly. It was as though the library had folded in on itself, creating a space untethered from reality. Evelyn took a cautious step in, and the room reacted. The shelves shifted imperceptibly, narrowing around her path, guiding her toward a central lectern. On it lay a massive book bound in cracked black leather, its surface covered with etchings that seemed to writhe when viewed from the corner of her eye. She knew this book. She should not, yet she did. It was the one the librarian had indicated in the index, the book that recorded all who entered, all who wandered, all who lost themselves within the library's walls. The Ledger of Readers, it was called, though no title was inscribed. As she approached, the pages fluttered violently, then stopped as though waiting for her touch. She felt a pull, irresistible and magnetic. Her hand reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the leather, the room shifted again. Shelves stretched upward, then contracted. The floating tables rotated, forming a spiral around her. The room no longer had walls in the conventional sense. The floor seemed endless beneath her feet, the ceiling swallowed in darkness above. It was disorienting, vertiginous, and yet she felt no fear, only a strange, intoxicating compulsion to read. The ledger's pages opened beneath her touch. Words formed instantly, ink thickening and drying before her eyes. They were not mere words, but living images, scenes that played out in her mind's eye with all the clarity of memory. She saw the library itself, not as it was now, but as it had always been. Corridors extending into infinity, rooms that rearranged themselves according to the thoughts and fears of the reader. A shadow moved across the pages, a figure she recognized from the index. A man, hollow-eyed, clutching a book as though it were a lifeline. His face twisted in agony, then relief, then resignation. The ledger whispered his story, and Evelyn realized with a jolt that each reader became a fragment of the library. Those who spent too long within its walls left pieces of themselves behind, feeding the rooms, the shelves, the very air with memory and consciousness. The pages turned themselves faster now, revealing names she recognized, some familiar from her own life, some she had never encountered. Each name carried a story, a life recorded, sometimes finished, sometimes abruptly cut off. And then she understood. The library did not merely contain stories. It was stories. every corridor. A noise behind her made her start. She turned and found herself facing the librarian once more. Its face, featureless and black, seemed closer, more imposing. Its hand extended toward her, fingers stretching unnaturally. "Do you understand now?" it asked. Its voice was calm, almost gentle, yet it carried an undercurrent of inevitability. I think so," Evelyn whispered. "The rooms, they're alive." The librarian inclined its head. "They are. They respond to thought, to desire, to fear. They shift, rearrange, and expand according to the stories of those within. And they will protect the library from those who would leave unmarked, from those who would take more than they are given." Evelyn's mind reeled. "And the ledger?" "The ledger contains all," said the librarian. "Those who enter, those who read, those who remember. It is the central nexus. To touch it is to bind yourself to the library. To resist it is to be erased." Evelyn felt a shiver of terror. "Erased, yes," said the librarian. "Not forgotten, not absent, erased, as though you had never existed. Those who leave without balance leave a void that the library cannot permit. Every reader must pay their debt." The room seemed to pulse with the words, the shelves vibrating imperceptibly, whispering. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She wanted to run, but she could not. The pull was too strong. Every fiber of her being wanted to know, to understand, to read further. Her gaze fell on a book lying open on a nearby floating table. The title shimmered, forming letters that seemed to coil like smoke. "The Room That Remembers You." Evelyn approached it cautiously. The moment she touched the page, the room shifted again. She was no longer in the library proper, but in her own apartment. Though distorted, the walls stretched, elongated. The furniture leaned at impossible angles. Shadows of herself moved independently, repeating her own actions, a moment too late. She gasped, stumbling backward. The room pulsed with life, responding to her fear. Every thought she had, every flicker of memory, caused the space to shift and twist. She realized with a sickening clarity that the library had not just mapped the lives of others, it had mapped hers. Every corridor, every floating shelf, every whispering shadow was a reflection of her own fears, regrets, and unspoken thoughts. The librarian's voice echoed through the distorted apartment. "Do you see? The library does not merely contain you, it is you, and you are the library." Evelyn felt tears stinging her eyes. I don't understand. How can this be real?" The shadows around her coalesced into forms, faces of people she had loved and lost, moments she had wished to forget, regrets she had tried to bury. They circled her, whispering fragments of memory. She reached out instinctively, and each touch caused a ripple across the room. Bending walls, tilting floors, sending shelves tumbling in slow motion. "You are becoming aware," said the librarian, "aware of the cost, aware of the responsibility. The rooms respond to you because you have opened yourself to them, and they will not stop until you accept that every action, every thought, every secret carries weight. Evelyn collapsed onto the warped floor. She felt the gravity of the library press down, not physically, but psychically. Her mind raced. She could see the lives recorded in the ledger, the lost fragments of those who had come before. She could see herself reflected in every shifting corridor, every floating table, every whispering shadow. And she knew she could not leave, not yet. The rooms shifted again, contracting around her, guiding her gaze to a far corner of the space. A door appeared, inscribed with the same golden letters she had seen before. Enter. If you wish to truly know yourself. Evelyn rose unsteadily. She knew what awaited her beyond that door. Another room, another test, another revelation. And yet, the pull was irresistible. She stepped forward. The library responded instantly. Shelves spiraled, tables floated, shadows lengthened. The corridors bent around her, forming a path she could not resist. Every step she took resonated with the hum of the library itself. She was no longer a visitor. She was a participant, a story being written in real time. And as she crossed the threshold into the new room, the whispering voices crescendoed, overlapping in a chorus that was at once terrifying and intimate. Welcome, Evelyn Ward. You have returned. You will read. You will remember. And you will pay the price. Chapter 5. The Librarian's Ledger. Evelyn had begun to understand the library's rhythm, though not its logic. The corridors no longer simply extended or contracted. They reacted to her fear, her hesitation, and her curiosity. Each step she took seemed to echo through unseen chambers, and somewhere in that endless expanse, the pages of books rustled in response. The room she had entered after the last shifting corridor was unlike any other she had seen. Tall, narrow windows lined one wall, though the glass was blackened, reflecting not her own image, but echoes of other readers, trapped, wandering, frozen mid-action. Every shadowed figure seemed to recognize her, though she did not recognize them. Their mouths moved soundlessly, whispering warnings she could almost hear. At the center of the room stood a large lectern. On it rested a massive tome, bound in black leather, so old it seemed almost molten. Its edges were frayed, the spine creased in countless places. The cover bore no title, only a symbol she could not decipher, curling like smoke. As she approached, the room shifted again, shelves stretching toward the ceiling, tables tilting slightly, as though the library itself were leaning in to watch her every move. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the book. The moment she touched it, the air thickened. The whispers intensified, low, hurried, almost frantic. Some sounded like voices she remembered. Others were foreign. All of them whispered of mistakes, of debts unpaid, of lives forgotten. The book opened beneath her hands, the pages turning of their own accord, words scrawled across them in an ink that seemed alive, pulsing faintly as if breathing. Evelyn's eyes darted across the sentences, each line cutting deeper than the last. Every reader leaves a mark. Every story taken is a piece of the self given. Every secret revealed costs something precious. The library remembers. The ledger records. Her pulse quickened. She had felt this before, in the index room, in the corridors that rearranged themselves, in the shadows that mirrored her fear. The ledger was not just a book, it was a binding. Every name, every page, every story was tethered to a person, a memory, a fragment of life. And now it had her. The whispers coalesced into a voice, the librarian, silent until now. Its presence behind her was unmistakable, though she had not seen it move. The figure exuded calm authority, though the air around it seemed charged with a subtle menace. "Do you understand, Evelyn?" it asked. Its tone was patient, deliberate. "This book contains all who have entered, every choice, every hesitation, and yet it is incomplete. Some stories linger, unfinished, some debts remain unpaid, and some readers attempt to leave without acknowledgement of their cost." Evelyn's voice faltered. I don't want to pay anything. I just want to understand." The librarian's hands, featureless and still, rested on the lectern. "Understanding is a transaction, Evelyn. Knowledge is a currency. And this ledger is the accounting." A drawer materialized beside the lectern, sliding open silently. Inside lay dozens of small, empty books. Each was fragile, pale leather, their covers soft to the touch. Evelyn felt drawn toward them, though she understood the risk. Each book represented a story yet unwritten, a debt yet incurred, a memory yet claimed. Her fingers brushed the nearest volume. The instant she touched it, images flashed in her mind. Moments of her life she had thought private, forgotten incidents she had suppressed, her own childhood, her mistakes, the faces of people she had abandoned or ignored. And behind all of them, the library's subtle hand guiding, shaping, preserving. "You see," the librarian said, its voice low, almost intimate, "the library does not forget. Every secret, every fear, every wish, it is recorded, and every story demands balance. To read is to give. To know is to lose something of yourself. You have already begun paying, whether you realize it or not." Evelyn staggered back. "But what will happen if I can't pay?" The librarian inclined its head slightly. "Then your story is removed, not erased entirely, but suspended, frozen, a ghost in the ledger. The library preserves all who enter, but those who leave debts unpaid become shadows, existing only in half memory, unseen by the world outside, forgotten by themselves. The room itself seemed to pulse with the weight of those unclaimed stories. Shelves stretched upward, tilting, bending, as if to illustrate its power. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, overlapping in a chorus of frustration, sorrow, and longing. Evelyn realized that the shadows in the windows of the previous room had been these suspended stories, echoes of lives halted mid-journey. Her stomach churned. She had come seeking understanding, curiosity guiding her, and now she understood too much. The ledger was a mirror of the soul. Every page she touched, every story she read, changed her irreversibly. Then what do I do? She whispered. The librarian extended a featureless hand toward the floating books. You read, you write, you balance. For each story you uncover, you must offer a piece of yourself, a memory, a secret, a truth, and only then can the ledger accept it. Evelyn swallowed hard, her mind racing. She reached for the nearest book. The moment she opened it, she was no longer in the room, but inside the story itself. She saw a young boy standing alone on a playground, clutching a small, worn teddy bear. His eyes were wide with fear, his movements hesitant. Evelyn recognized the subtle contours of his face. She had seen him in the streets, in photographs, in memories that were not hers but seemed borrowed. He waited. He always waited for a friend, a parent, an acknowledgement, and no one came. The boy's fear mirrored her own, her solitude, her yearning for understanding. She reached out instinctively, touching the pages. A cold tingle ran through her fingers, and she felt a piece of her own childhood, a memory of loneliness, of nights spent staring at the ceiling, wishing for someone to notice her, being drawn into the story. When the scene faded, she found herself back in the room. The pages of the book were filled now, inked in her own handwriting. Though she had not consciously written a word, she understood the ledger demanded payment. She had given it a memory, a part of herself, in exchange for the story. The librarian watched silently. Every reader contributes, every reader pays, and every reader changes the library as much as it changes them. Evelyn's mind reeled. She had always thought of stories as passive, as something to consume. But here, in this place, reading was creation and destruction, exchange and sacrifice. The library was alive because it was fed by lives, by memories, by secrets. Another book called to her, floating slightly above the lectern, bound in deep crimson. She opened it hesitantly. The images that appeared were darker, more twisted. She saw adults making cruel choices, children being abandoned, friends betraying one another. She saw herself reflected in these actions, moments she had been ashamed to remember, shadows she had hoped to bury. To know is to bear witness. To witness is to change, and to change is to pay." The words echoed in her mind, resonating through her chest. She realized now that the ledger was not just a record, it was a teacher, a punisher, a judge. It demanded honesty, demanded recognition, demanded sacrifice. And every reader who hesitated or resisted risked becoming another lost entry, a shadow suspended between existence and oblivion. She closed the book and sank to her knees. Tears streamed down her face. She had wanted answers, clarity, understanding, and now she understood. The library did not exist to comfort her. It existed to test her, to extract from her the parts she had hidden even from herself. The librarian's voice was soft, almost compassionate. "Do you see why the ledger exists?" "Yes," she whispered. I do." "Then read," it said. "Write, balance, and remember, the cost is yours to bear, but the reward is clarity. The library is not mercy, it is truth, and truth requires payment." Evelyn rose unsteadily, reaching for another book. She understood now that there was no turning back. She had stepped too far into the library's depths, and each story she uncovered would claim a piece of her. And yet she could not stop, because the ledger awaited, because the library remembered, because she had already begun paying, and because, deep in the shadows, she could hear the faint chorus of other readers, their whispers echoing through the walls. "Do not linger too long. Do not forget the price. Do not resist." Evelyn inhaled sharply and opened the next book. The pages fluttered toward her as though hungry. The words began to appear, and with each word, each memory, each truth she offered. Chapter 6. The Forgotten Wing. Evelyn's hands were trembling, ink-stained and worn from hours of reading and writing in the ledger. She had begun to understand the rhythm of the library, yet understanding was not comfort. It was a weight pressing on her chest, a cold gravity that seemed to thrum with the library's heartbeat. Every whisper, every shuffle of paper, every faint hum in the walls reminded her the library was aware of her. It was alive. The next corridor she entered stretched impossibly far. She had passed through this space before, though the details had shifted. Shelves that once stood in perfect rows now formed twisting, convoluted mazes. The floor undulated slightly, soft like moss, yet firm beneath her feet. Shadows flickered where no light should fall. The whispering voices that had guided and warned her now murmured in layers, overlapping, fragmented, indecipherable. At the far end of the corridor, a door materialized as though summoned by her approach. Its wood was cracked and faded, blackened by age. A small metal plaque read in embossed letters, "The Forgotten Wing." Evelyn paused. The name alone sent a chill down her spine. She had already seen parts of the library that trapped the lost, the suspended, the incomplete. But the term forgotten carried with it a finality, an inevitability she could not ignore. She knew instinctively that this wing was different, more dangerous, more alive, more hungry. The door creaked open at her touch, and a faint, musty odor drifted out, tinged with something metallic, like iron. She stepped inside, her pulse quickening. The room was vast, impossibly tall, and dimly lit by chandeliers that hung without chains, flickering as though fed by unseen currents. Shelves stretched into shadow, bending in impossible angles. Some leaned against nothing at all, their tops disappearing into darkness, and among the shelves, figures moved. They were other readers, lost readers, people she had glimpsed in the shadows before, pale and hollow-eyed, wandering endlessly, clutching books as though they were life preservers. Some whispered to themselves, repeating words she could not hear. Others stared silently at the shelves, their eyes vacant but alert. A cold realization struck her. These people were trapped, not merely present, not merely remembered, but imprisoned in the library's memory. And she, too, was beginning to understand, was beginning to feel the pull that would make her one of them if she hesitated too long. One figure approached, stepping lightly over the uneven floor. She could see him clearly now, a man in his late 20s, dark hair matted, clothing worn. His eyes were wide and unblinking, fixed on the ledger in her hands. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost a whisper. You can read it." "Yes," Evelyn said cautiously. I have to. I have no choice." The man's gaze softened slightly. "Most don't. Most wander for years, never touching the ledger, never balancing their debt. They fade, they become shadows." Evelyn swallowed. She had begun to understand the full horror of what the librarian had told her in Chapter 5. To leave unpaid, unbalanced, unacknowledged, meant suspension, existence, without memory or recognition, a ghost in the library forever. Can I help them?" she asked. Her voice trembled. "Is there a way to free them?" The man shook his head. "No, only the library can release them, and it does so according to rules none of us fully understand. You are different. You are active. You are writing, balancing. That is why you are not yet lost." A shiver ran down her spine. She realized that the ledger, the books, the rooms themselves were not passive. The library demanded engagement. It thrived on participation, and it recognized fear as easily as curiosity. The corridor extended further, leading her toward a series of rooms that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. One moment, a room contained a single shelf and a faintly humming chandelier. The next, it expanded into a cathedral of books, its walls arching impossibly into the void. Tables floated, pages fluttered, shadows shifted, and always the whispers followed, urging her forward, testing her resolve. In one room, she paused. On a small pedestal lay a book, unlike any she had seen. Its cover was stitched from a material that looked like skin, faintly mottled, warm to the touch. The title was etched in letters that seemed to writhe, the names that must not be forgotten. Evelyn's hand shook. The moment she opened it, she was surrounded by voices, hundreds of them, overlapping, crying, whispering, accusing, begging. They were the lost, the suspended, the incomplete stories she had glimpsed before. Their names, their memories, their regrets poured over her like a tidal wave. Remember us, do not forget us. We existed, we mattered. She could feel herself dizzying under the weight of their collective presence. Each name, each story, tugged at her mind, drawing her deeper into the library's currents. She tried to close the book, but it resisted, its pages turning faster, 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 demanding acknowledgement. The room began to spin, the shelves warping around her, and she understood with absolute clarity the library would not allow ignorance or neglect. To witness was to bear responsibility. To read was to commit. And every moment she hesitated, every second she considered running, she risked being absorbed, becoming another shadow among the forgotten. Balance, she whispered aloud, remembering the librarian's words. I must balance. She reached into her memory, recalling a moment she had long buried, a childhood friend she had abandoned, a promise unkept, a betrayal she had never admitted to anyone. She wrote it in the book, the words flowing from her mind, her fingers moving almost automatically. The voices around her quieted slightly, as though accepting the offering, acknowledging her payment. The room shuddered, the shelves settled, the chaos of pages and shadows slowed. She realized, with a faint relief, that the library responded to honesty, that recognition and acknowledgement were the only ways to survive within its ever-shifting walls. But her relief was short-lived. A faint noise, subtle yet unmistakable, echoed through the room. Footsteps, not hers, heavy, deliberate. The whispers paused, the shadows stiffened. Evelyn's pulse spiked. The librarian appeared at the far end of the room, standing motionless, as always, its featureless face tilted toward her, observing, calculating. You are learning, it said, voice soft yet absolute. But beware, the Forgotten Wing is more than a collection of lost stories. It is a test. One misstep, one hesitation, and even your payment may not be enough. The library is patient, but it is not forgiving. Evelyn swallowed hard. I understand. I will continue. The librarian inclined its head, fading into the shadows. The room shifted again, revealing a narrow passage that led deeper, twisting into darkness. Evelyn knew she had no choice but to follow. The voices of the lost echoed behind her, some whispering encouragement, others warning, some pleading desperately. Each step she took made the whispers stronger, more tangible, almost touching the edges of her consciousness. She entered the passage. The walls here were closer together, suffocating, lined with books that seemed to watch her, their pages fluttering as if alive. She reached for one. The moment she touched it, she was transported to a scene from her own past, a memory she had tried to forget. Her younger self sat alone on a bench in a rainy park, staring at children playing in the distance. She remembered the loneliness, the helplessness, the ache of being unseen. Tears sprang to her eyes as she relived it. She understood now why the library demanded honesty. Every reader's memory, every secret was a thread in its fabric, and to ignore them was to unravel the balance. When she closed the book, she found herself back in the forgotten wing. The shelves had rearranged, forming a labyrinthine pattern that twisted impossibly into the distance. Shadows moved within the gaps, and faint whispers persisted. Evelyn realized that the wing was alive, not only with the stories of others, but with the fear of being forgotten, and that fear fed its power. Her steps grew more deliberate. Each book she touched, each memory she offered, each secret she acknowledged, she felt herself losing and gaining in equal measure. The library demanded sacrifice, but it also offered understanding. And in this balance, she found a strange, fragile strength. Hours, or perhaps days, passed. Time here was unmoored, flowing according to the rhythm of the rooms and the stories they contained. Evelyn encountered dozens of lost readers, some still aware, some mere shadows. She observed their patterns, learned their methods of coping, and understood that the library did not destroy, it transformed. Those who survived became part of its ecosystem, their stories sustaining its endless expansion. By the time she reached the far end of the forgotten wing, she was exhausted but resolute. The corridors stretched ahead, endless and dark. Yet she felt a tentative grasp on purpose. The library was no longer merely a place of terror. It was a mirror, a reflection of herself and of every reader who had come before. And she had begun to navigate its depths with awareness. A final whisper, soft and insistent, brushed her ear. Remember, Evelyn Ward, balance, honesty, and courage are your only tools here. The library tests all who enter. Do not falter. And with that, the forgotten wing shifted once more, opening a doorway that led to a new chamber she had never seen before. One that promised revelations far deeper than she had yet imagined, and challenges that would test the very essence of her identity. She stepped forward. Chapter 7. The Hall of Echoed Faces. Evelyn's footsteps echoed unnaturally as she emerged from the forgotten wing. The corridors behind her had contracted and shifted, leaving only a faint suggestion of the path she had just traversed. Each step she took now seemed deliberate, calculated by some unseen intelligence within the library itself. She had learned, painfully, that hesitation here was dangerous. Every second wasted invited the rooms, the shelves, the shadows to reshape themselves. to test, to punish, to consume. Ahead, a new space revealed itself. The archway was tall, carved of dark wood in intricate curling patterns that almost seemed alive, writhing subtly as she approached. Above it, a simple plaque read, "The Hall of Echoed Faces." Evelyn paused at the threshold. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She had glimpsed echoes of people before, shadows of lost readers, frozen fragments of memory, but the hall promised something more, something personal, something that would reach beyond observation and into the very core of her being. The moment she stepped inside, the library responded. The air grew heavier, scented faintly with old paper ink, and something coppery, like blood. The walls were lined with mirrors, but these mirrors were not reflective in the ordinary sense. Instead, they shimmered with faces, faces she knew, faces she had seen in fleeting moments of her life, friends, family, strangers, and some she did not immediately recognize, yet felt eerily familiar. As she walked, the faces shifted. Their eyes followed her, unblinking. Some mouths moved silently, whispering fragments of words she could almost hear. Others smiled, grimaced, or twisted in expressions of fear, anger, sorrow. And as she moved deeper into the hall, she realized with a jolt, these faces were not merely images. They were reflections of memory and action, each echo representing a choice she had made, a secret she had kept, or a moment she had forgotten. A voice, low and deliberate, resonated through the space. The librarian. "You see now," it said, though it did not appear, why the library exists. It is not only a collection of stories. It is a mirror, a judge, a witness. Every choice, every secret, every omission is recorded, and every echo will confront you. Evelyn's breath caught. "Confront me. Why?" The hall seemed to respond to her fear. Faces leaned closer, their eyes narrowing, their mouths forming words she could almost hear. "Remember this. You left me. You lied to me. You forgot me." She stumbled, almost falling, her hands clutching at the nearest wall. The mirrors rippled under her touch, and she realized with a sinking understanding that this hall adapted to her thoughts. Every memory she tried to suppress, every secret she had buried, manifested here, demanding acknowledgement. She approached one of the mirrors cautiously. The reflection that stared back at her was herself, yet distorted. Her eyes were wider, haunted. Her hands trembled more than they did in reality, and behind her, shadowy forms mimicked her movements, as though her own actions were being recorded and replayed by the hall itself. "You cannot hide from yourself here," whispered a chorus of voices. Evelyn swallowed hard. She had known the library would demand honesty, would require balance, but she had not anticipated this intimate level of confrontation. It was one thing to offer a memory, a secret, a story. It was another to be forced to witness yourself, simultaneously judge, and judged through every choice you had ever made. She moved further into the hall, each step revealing more faces. Some were people she had wronged, classmates from her youth, colleagues she had betrayed, acquaintances she had ignored. Others were strangers whose lives had intersected with hers in ways she could not have anticipated. And for each face, a faint whisper emerged. "Remember me. You have forgotten me. You have overlooked me." A book floated before her, landing gently on a pedestal that had materialized in the center of the room. Its cover was black, stitched in faintly glimmering thread. Evelyn recognized its form. It was part of the Ledger series, yet distinct. This book seemed alive, as if aware of her presence, of her fear, of her memories. When she opened it, she was drawn into a memory long suppressed. She was 8 years old, standing in the rain outside a small house, watching her best friend's family leave without noticing her. She had been hurt, abandoned in the moment, but had convinced herself it did not matter. The memory was vivid now, the sting of rejection, sharp and immediate. The book demanded acknowledgement. As she read, the words reshaped themselves. "You left me. You walked away. You pretended not to see, and I waited. You have carried this too long without recognition." Evelyn's chest tightened. She realized the ledger did not merely record action or omission. It recorded emotional truth, the resonance of every unspoken thought, every neglected feeling. To ignore it was impossible. To accept it required courage. She whispered into the space, I see you. I am sorry." The whisper seemed to echo infinitely. The shadows softened, the faces in the mirrors relaxing ever so slightly, and a faint warmth brushed her mind, a reward for honesty, a fragile acknowledgement from the hall that she had begun to pay her debt. But the relief was fleeting. Another face appeared, her own, but older, exhausted, hollow-eyed, a version of herself she had not yet become, but feared. It spoke in her own voice, low and accusatory. "You will falter, you will resist, you will fail, and the library will claim you as it has claimed others." The mirrors quivered, shadows lengthened unnaturally, reaching toward her, testing, pressing, demanding engagement. Evelyn realized then that the hall was not merely a place of reflection, but of trial. Every reader who entered was forced to confront the sum of themselves, their past choices, and the truths they had avoided. She stumbled backward, her mind racing. She had survived the forgotten wing. She had engaged with the ledger. But this was different. The hall did not allow partial acknowledgement. It required complete recognition. Every secret, every lie, every act of omission, no matter how small, had to be acknowledged. Her pulse thundered. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to focus. The mirrors were everywhere, yet she realized she could control her perception slightly by choosing which echoes to face first. She selected a few the most immediate. She confronted each in turn, acknowledging, apologizing, remembering. With each act, the hall shifted. Shadows withdrew, faces softened. The oppressive weight lightened fractionally. And Evelyn understood, painfully and beautifully, that the library rewarded engagement. It demanded honesty, not just action. Truth, no matter how small, was currency. Hours passed, though time was unmeasured here. Evelyn moved deliberately, confronting echoes of herself, her actions, her omissions. Each acknowledgement exacted a toll, drawing memories from her mind, leaving her slightly hollowed, yet paradoxically more aware, more grounded. A sudden movement at the periphery drew her attention. Another reader emerged from the shadows, a young woman, pale and hollow-eyed, clutching a small book. Her gaze met Evelyn's for a brief moment. Recognition passed between them, not words, not introductions, just the shared understanding of survival. The woman gestured toward a distant corridor. Evelyn realized the hall had more to reveal, more tests, more echoes. And though exhaustion clawed at her, she knew she had no choice but to continue. The library was patient, but it did not forgive hesitation. As she moved forward, the whispers coalesced into a chorus. Remember, face yourself, acknowledge, balance, pay the cost. And Evelyn understood fully for the first time that the library's lessons were unending. Each chapter, each corridor, each room tested, taught, and claimed. And yet, within the pressure, there was clarity, there was growth, there was survival, if she had the courage to endure. With a final deep breath, she stepped toward the next corridor, the hall of echoed faces receding slightly behind her. She carried the weight of acknowledgement, the hollow ache of honesty, and the fragile strength of engagement. The library waited ahead, infinite and alive, and she would continue. Chapter 8, The Room of Sacrifices. Evelyn's steps were cautious as she left the hall of echoed faces behind. Each corridor felt alive, the floorboards subtly shifting beneath her weight, the walls pulsing faintly, whispering secrets she could almost hear. She had begun to understand the rhythm of the library. It moved with thought and fear, with curiosity and hesitation, and every step she took carried weight. Ahead, a doorway emerged, heavier, more ominous than the others. Its frame was carved with spiraling patterns, etched deeply into wood, so dark it seemed almost wet. Above it, a simple inscription read, "The Room of Sacrifices." Evelyn's stomach tightened. She had felt the library's hunger in every corridor, every room, every floating book. But this threshold carried a weight unlike any before. She knew instinctively that beyond this door, the rules she had learned, honesty, acknowledgement, balance, would be tested in the most personal and terrifying way. The air beyond the threshold was cooler, thicker. A metallic scent clung to it, sharp and bitter. She stepped inside, and immediately felt the library respond. The floor was polished black stone, reflecting faint flickers of candlelight that hovered in midair. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, moving independently, curling and shifting as though alive. At the center of the room stood a raised platform. On it rested a pedestal, and upon the pedestal lay a single book, smaller than the ledger, but radiating a sense of absolute authority. Its cover was deep crimson, bound in stitched leather. When Evelyn's eyes met it, she felt a subtle pull in her chest, like gravity bending toward the object. The whispers came again, low, insistent, overlapping. Every knowledge exacts a price. Every truth demands a cost. Are you ready to pay, Evelyn Ward? She swallowed, her throat dry. I am, she whispered, though doubt gnawed at the edges of her courage. She approached the pedestal, her fingers trembling as she reached for the book. The moment she touched it, the room shifted, shadows elongated, merging into forms, figures from her past, moments of guilt, forgotten decisions, betrayals, real and imagined. Each figure demanded attention, acknowledgement, and with every hesitation, the air grew heavier, pressing against her chest. The first figure solidified, her younger self seated alone on a school bench, clutching a tattered notebook she had abandoned in haste. The memory surged vividly, the loneliness, the shame, the unspoken longing for connection. Evelyn realized that the room was feeding on her fear and hesitation, and that this was the first sacrifice the library demanded, recognition of her own past failings. I acknowledge you, she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. I was wrong to leave you, to ignore you. The figure softened, the shadows around her pulse slowing, releasing some of their oppressive weight. And yet, no sooner had she accepted this memory than another figure emerged, her first betrayal, a friend she had deceived, a lie she had told to protect herself. The room's pressure intensified, the shadows writhed, whispering in unison, balance, confess, pay. Evelyn's hands shook as she reached out, touching the figure. Instantly, she was drawn into the memory, living it again, feeling the shame, the fear, the weight of responsibility. She spoke aloud, acknowledging her actions, offering the truth in exchange for release. When she returned to the room, the figure faded, leaving behind a subtle warmth, a small, vital relief. The process repeated, relentlessly. Childhood failures, betrayals, unspoken truths, moments she had ignored or suppressed, each demanded acknowledgement, each exacted a toll. Evelyn felt herself growing hollow, her mind stretching to contain the weight of her own life, the memories of others, and the ever-present pressure of the library itself. Then the room shifted dramatically. Shelves emerged from the floor, rising like jagged cliffs. Tables floated, rotating, forming a labyrinthine pattern around the pedestal. The crimson book hovered slightly above the surface, pulsing faintly. Shadows coalesced into a more tangible presence, a mirror of Evelyn herself, older, hollow-eyed, and silent. "You cannot hide from what you have become," the whispers said. The mirror figure stepped forward. Each movement mirrored Evelyn's own past actions, choices she had denied or forgotten. She saw the consequences of inaction, opportunities lost, friendships destroyed, moments she had abandoned others. I accept responsibility," she whispered, though her voice trembled. The figure lunged toward her, and the room erupted in chaos. Shadows collided with one another, shelves twisted violently, and floating tables tilted precariously. Evelyn's mind spun with every memory, every regret, every secret she had hidden from the world, and now from herself. To survive, she realized she had to sacrifice not only acknowledgement, but also part of herself. She had already given memories, truths, and secrets to the ledger. Now, the library demanded essence, the intangible weight of her identity. She closed her eyes, reaching deep into her mind. She allowed the room to consume her memories of self-preservation, of fear, of hesitation. She offered pieces of her confidence, her pride, her certainty, fragments that made her whole but also kept her human. The shadows slowed, the mirrored figure halted, and the crimson book pulsed more brightly, as though satisfied. The whispers softened. The room became still, the floating shelves settling into impossible yet stable configurations. Evelyn collapsed onto the stone floor, exhausted but alive. She had survived the first true test of the room of sacrifices, yet she knew, with absolute clarity, there would be more, and each would demand greater payment. A faint voice, barely audible above the settling of shadows, spoke. "Few endure the room of sacrifices twice." Evelyn struggled to her feet, her mind reeling. The library had revealed its core truth. Knowledge, understanding, and truth were never free. Every story exacted a cost, and every secret required payment in some form of essence, memory, or identity. She approached the crimson book again. Its pages fluttered, opening of their own accord. Scenes appeared before her eyes, lives intersecting, choices colliding, actions and consequences interwoven in patterns both terrifying and beautiful. Each page demanded recognition. Each illustration required acknowledgement. Evelyn realized that to read fully was to commit, and to commit was to sacrifice. She began to write, offering her experiences, her truths, her memories. The shadows responded, coiling around her, sometimes gentle, sometimes pressing, always demanding full honesty. Hours, days, or perhaps only minutes passed. Time was irrelevant here. The library measured not by clocks, but by engagement, by honesty, by sacrifice. A sudden movement at the periphery caught her attention. Another reader had entered the room of sacrifices, a young boy, no older than 12, clutching a tattered book. His eyes were wide with fear, yet there was recognition in his gaze. Evelyn felt a pang of empathy. He had entered too far, too unprepared, and the room would exact its price from him unless she acted. She approached him cautiously. You must acknowledge your truths," she whispered. "The room will not forgive hesitation." The boy shook, tears streaming down his face. I don't understand," he stammered. Evelyn nodded, her own exhaustion heavy in her limbs. "I know, I didn't either, but we pay, or we remain lost. It is the library's rule." Together, they began the process. Evelyn guided him through acknowledgement, confession, and recognition. Each step was painstaking, each memory a struggle. Yet slowly, the boy's presence became steadier, his fear less acute. The shadows relaxed, the mirrored figure receded, and the crimson book pulsed with subtle warmth. The room, momentarily satisfied, became still. Evelyn realized that the library's demands were not arbitrary. They were lessons, brutal, unrelenting, but precise. And while the cost was high, survival and understanding were possible for those willing to pay it fully. Exhausted, Evelyn collapsed against a floating shelf, watching the crimson book pulse gently before her. She knew now that she was irreversibly changed, that each sacrifice, each acknowledgement, each payment altered her in ways that were permanent. The library had claimed pieces of her identity, but in return, it had granted clarity, awareness, and preparation for what lay ahead. The whispers softened, fading into the corners of the room. The shadows receded, leaving only the faint flicker of candlelight, suspended in the air, illuminating the impossible geometry of the shelves. Evelyn breathed deeply, her mind heavy but lucid. She had survived the room of sacrifices, but she knew the next chambers would demand even more. And somewhere deep within the library's vast expanse, the ledger awaited, recording her progress, marking her payments, anticipating the final reckoning. Evelyn rose, feeling the hollow ache of loss mingled with the clarity of knowledge. She would continue. She had no choice but to continue. For the library remembered everything, and every reader must finish what they began. With a final glance at the crimson book, she stepped toward the next corridor, knowing that the cost of understanding was eternal vigilance, constant sacrifice, and unflinching honesty. Chapter 9, The Heart of the Library. Evelyn moved forward with careful, deliberate steps. The corridors of the library had grown less predictable, less tangible. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in rhythm with her heartbeat. Every shadow shifted in tandem with her thoughts. Every whisper tuned to the subtle tremors of fear and anticipation that coursed through her veins. She had survived the forgotten wing, faced the hall of echoed faces, endured the room of sacrifices, each ordeal stripping away fragments of herself while granting insight, awareness, and clarity. But she knew instinctively that she was approaching the central chamber, the place whispered about in echoes she had overheard from lost readers. A massive doorway materialized before her, carved from obsidian-like stone. Its surface shimmered with faint golden runes that pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat. No handle existed, no obvious means of entry, yet as she approached, the doorway parted silently, revealing a chamber bathed in warm, spectral light. The heart of the library stretched before her. Shelves formed concentric circles around a central platform, floating in midair. Books hovered freely, their pages fluttering as though breathing. Shadows curled around the edges, watching, waiting, alive. The air was thick with the scent of parchment ink, and something else she could not name, a metallic sweetness that prickled her senses. At the center of the chamber, on a pedestal crafted from the same obsidian as the doorway, lay the ledger itself. It was larger than any book she had seen, bound in black leather, stitched with threads of silver that shimmered like liquid moonlight. The cover was featureless, save for the faint pulsing glow emanating from its spine. Evelyn felt the pull immediately, a tug at her mind, her memories, her very being. The whispers intensified, merging into a single, coherent voice. You have come far, Evelyn Ward. You have paid. You have sacrificed. You have witnessed, and yet the ledger requires more. Her pulse spiked. What more could it want? She asked aloud, though she knew the question was rhetorical. The library did not answer. It tested. It did not provide clarity until the reader had engaged fully, sacrificed fully, and acknowledged fully. From the shadows, the librarian appeared, its featureless face tilted toward her. Its presence was commanding, suffocating, yet calm. It radiated authority, and yet there was an almost imperceptible softness, a subtle acknowledgement that Evelyn's endurance had not gone unnoticed. You have walked far, Evelyn, it said. Few reach the heart, fewer still survive the ledger's full gaze. And now you must understand the truth. The ledger pulsed brighter, pages fluttering on their own. Evelyn stepped closer, her fingers trembling as she extended her hand toward it. The instant her skin brushed the cover, a flood of visions assaulted her mind. Memories not only of herself, but of every reader who had ever entered the library surged through her consciousness. She saw lives intersecting, choices diverging, consequences spiraling outward like ripples across a pond. This is the library, whispered the collective voices. This is every story, every secret, every choice, and every reader is a thread in its weave. Evelyn staggered, clutching the pedestal. She felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the enormity of the ledger's knowledge. the librarian's voice broke through. You are not merely a reader, Evelyn. You are part of the library's memory. Every thought, every secret, every fear you have acknowledged is now woven into its essence. And yet, the ledger demands understanding, not only of the self, but of the whole. She swallowed hard. The whole. The librarian inclined its head. The library is not passive. It is alive. It remembers everything. It balances everything. And to master it, to endure it, you must acknowledge the cost. Not merely your own, but the cost inherent in the act of knowing. Evelyn's heart pounded. She had faced her past, acknowledged her mistakes, sacrificed fragments of herself. But the ledger was revealing that knowledge itself carried a toll, a weight beyond personal confession or personal sacrifice. The room shifted subtly, and shelves rose higher, forming a spiraling staircase around the central platform. Floating books drifted upward, orbiting the ledger-like planets. Evelyn realized she must ascend, step by deliberate step, to confront the ledger fully, to face the final trial. Each step was a struggle. With every ascent, visions of herself, past, present, and possible futures, flickered across her mind. She saw herself succumbing to fear, becoming lost, becoming a shadow among the forgotten. She saw herself failing, betraying her own principles, abandoning truths she had fought to confront. And she saw herself enduring, sacrificing, acknowledging, transforming into someone irrevocably changed by the library's demands. The whispers became a chant, a rhythm that matched her pulse, balance, sacrifice, witness, no. She reached the top platform, standing before the ledger. Its pages fluttered as though breathing. The pull was irresistible, tugging not only at her mind, but at her soul. She extended her hand, prepared to touch the ledger fully. And as her fingers brushed the cover, the library's essence poured into her. Visions exploded within her. Every secret ever told or withheld, every life intersecting, every consequence rippling outward. The weight was immense, almost unbearable. She felt herself fracturing, her sense of self stretching thin. Yet amidst the chaos, clarity emerged. She saw patterns, balance, and design within the library's apparent chaos. She understood the library was not malicious. It was order incarnate, an arbiter of knowledge and truth, demanding balance at every turn. The ledger pulsed, and the librarian's voice echoed through her mind. You are ready, Evelyn, but understanding demands cost. Every truth you witness here must be balanced with acknowledgement, every secret with sacrifice. To know fully is to surrender fully. Yet in surrender, you are strengthened. Are you prepared? Evelyn's chest ached, her hands shook, her mind teetering on the edge of comprehension and collapse. And yet, she nodded. I am ready. The ledger opened. Words, glowing faintly silver, appeared across the pages. Images flickered, lives she had touched unknowingly, moments of consequence she had failed to see, secrets buried too long, connections unacknowledged. For each, she felt a fragment of herself drawn forward, offered as payment, as acknowledgement, as balance. She wrote with trembling hands every memory she had suppressed, every truth she had hidden, every fear she had denied. The ledger accepted them, absorbing them into its essence. Each confession exacted a toll, a sensation of emptiness, of being stretched thin, yet each also granted clarity, insight, understanding. Evelyn felt herself woven into the library itself, a thread in its vast tapestry, integral, acknowledged, and alive. Hours passed, though time held no meaning here. The library measured not by minutes or hours, but by engagement, honesty, and sacrifice. Evelyn wrote continuously, offering fragments of herself in exchange for insight, understanding, and survival. The room pulsed with her effort, shadows coiling and relaxing, floating books orbiting her as if marking her progress. Then a new vision appeared, her greatest fear, herself lost entirely, becoming another shadow among the forgotten, erased from memory and consciousness, a ghost tethered only to the library's record. She recoiled, heart pounding, but the librarian's voice cut through her fear. You have the choice. Knowledge demands cost. Fear is optional. Evelyn took a deep breath. She offered the fear, acknowledging it, surrendering it. The vision dissipated, replaced by calm understanding. She realized that mastery of the library was not avoidance, but engagement, not fearlessness, but acknowledgement. Finally, after what seemed both an eternity and a single heartbeat, the ledger's pulsing slowed, the shadows receded, the floating books settled, orbiting gently like planets in a stable system. Evelyn's body ached, her mind stretched to its limit, yet a profound clarity filled her. She understood the library, its demands, its nature. She was changed irrevocably, yet she was alive. The librarian stepped forward. You have endured, you have paid, you have acknowledged. You have known, and in knowing, you are ready to leave, if you choose. Evelyn nodded slowly. She felt hollow, yet whole, exhausted, yet clear. She understood now that the library was never ending, ever hungry, but precise, just, and beautiful in its design. To survive and leave, she had only to carry forward the lessons, the balance, the acknowledgement she had gained. The ledger closed gently, the pulsing fading. The chamber shifted, opening a doorway toward light, toward the corridors she had traversed, toward the world outside. Evelyn stepped forward, each movement deliberate, each breath a reminder of the cost she had paid. The library's whispers faded, soft and approving. Go forth, Evelyn Ward. Remember, acknowledge, balance. The library watches, but it rewards those who engage fully. She crossed the threshold, leaving the heart of the library behind. The corridors stretched out, familiar yet changed, leading her back toward the entrance, toward freedom. And as she walked, she felt the full weight of the journey she had endured. The forgotten wing, the hall of echoed faces, the room of sacrifices, and the ledger itself, and understood the profound, terrifying, and exquisite truth to know. One must pay, yet in paying, one is reborn. Evelyn stepped into the final corridor, aware that the library would always remember her, that it would always watch, and that her story, her truth, was now an indelible part of its essence. She carried forward the knowledge, the balance, the acknowledgement, and the strength to continue. Chapter 10: The Exit and the Price. Evelyn's steps echoed softly in the corridors, the light shifting around her like liquid memory. The heart of the library lay behind her, its presence fading yet omnipresent in her mind. Every shadow she had faced, every secret she had acknowledged, every sacrifice she had paid was stitched into her being. She felt hollow and full at once. The library had allowed her passage, though it had made clear that no one leaves unchanged. The ledger's gaze lingered in her mind's eye, a persistent reminder that knowledge always demanded a price, and that the threads of her existence were now woven into its vast, living tapestry. As she walked, the corridors stretched and shifted, morphing into familiar and unfamiliar shapes. Bookshelves rose and fell, staircases appeared and disappeared, walls rippled with light and shadow. It was as though the library itself was breathing, guiding her, testing her still, even in retreat. Ahead, she saw a faint glow, a doorway of pure golden light, contrasting sharply with the dark, ever-shifting corridors she had just navigated. This had to be the exit. And yet, as she approached, she felt the library's subtle pull, the quiet insistence that the journey was not truly over until the cost was fully paid. A whisper echoed across the corridor. To leave, one must balance all. Every acknowledgement, every sacrifice, every truth must be reconciled. Are you prepared, Evelyn Ward? She nodded, steadying herself. I am. The golden doorway expanded before her, revealing a wide open space, a library atrium she had not seen before. Sunlight poured in through vast, impossibly high windows. Dust motes floated lazily, suspended in the light like tiny stars. For the first time in days or hours or minutes, she could no longer measure time here. Evelyn felt air that was not heavy, that did not press upon her chest. And yet the library's final test awaited. On a pedestal in the center of the atrium lay a single book, unassuming yet radiating subtle authority. Its cover was plain, worn, and familiar. It was her own story, blank pages, awaiting the final inscriptions of her journey. The whispers returned, softer now, almost coaxing. Every reader leaves a mark. Every story must conclude. You may write, but every word takes a piece of you. Are you willing to pay the final price? Evelyn approached the book slowly, feeling the weight of her own existence in every step. She knelt, opening it carefully. The pages fluttered in anticipation, blank yet expectant. Memories, truths, acknowledgments, sacrifices, all demanded reflection. She realized that to exit, she could not simply walk away. She had to record, understand, and balance all she had endured. She began to write. Each sentence summoned fragments of her consciousness, memories she had faced in the hall of echoed faces, lessons learned in the room of sacrifices, insights from the heart of the library. Words poured from her, steady and deliberate, shaping the narrative of her journey. She acknowledged fear, guilt, joy, and sorrow. She inscribed lessons learned and truths realized. Every line exacted a toll, but also infused her with clarity and purpose. Hours passed, though the library held no measure of time. She wrote until her hands ached, her eyes blurred, yet she could not stop. The book demanded completion, and she felt the subtle pull of the library guiding her, urging, not forcing, every word she wrote. At last, the pages were filled. Evelyn closed the book, her body trembling from exhaustion and the enormity of what she had accomplished. She felt lighter, yet heavier, full yet hollow, as though the library had taken some of her essence, even as it granted her understanding. The golden doorway shifted slightly, widening, signaling the library's approval. Shadows in the atrium receded, light filling spaces that had once felt suffocating. The whispers softened, now gentle, approving, almost maternal. You have endured, you have balanced, you have acknowledged. You may leave, Evelyn Ward. And yet, remember, the library never forgets. Evelyn rose slowly, her legs unsteady. She walked toward the doorway, each step a mixture of relief and lingering tension. She could feel the library-esque presence in every corner of her mind, a living record of everything she had done, known, and sacrificed. And yet, for the first time, she felt a sense of completion. She stepped through the doorway, and the world outside welcomed her. Sunlight kissed her face. Birds sang faintly in the distance. The streets were empty, silent, yet alive with possibility. She drew in a deep breath, tasting air that was not heavy with memory or expectation. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to feel normal, human, free. And yet, even in this freedom, the library's influence lingered. She could feel it in her mind's eye, a subtle pulse of awareness, a reminder that knowledge exacts a price and memory is never free. She knew she would carry its lessons forever, that her life outside these walls would be shaped by the truths she had faced, the sacrifices she had made, and the understanding she had earned. Evelyn walked slowly, absorbing the world she had once taken for granted. Shadows of the library's corridors flickered briefly in her peripheral vision, a reminder of what she had endured. She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and resignation. She had survived, yes, but survival was only the beginning. The library had taught her that life itself is a ledger, recording every choice, every secret, every action, demanding acknowledgement and balance. As she reached the edge of the town, the sun dipping low toward the horizon, she paused. Her gaze lingered on the distant silhouette of the library, impossible yet undeniable, hidden in plain sight. She whispered softly, "Thank you, and goodbye." The shadows within the library shimmered in response, a subtle acknowledgement of her words, and then they faded, leaving only the memory of a place that would always remember her, even if she could never return. Evelyn turned, walking homeward, her mind alive with reflection. Her heart weighted with the knowledge she had gained, yet strengthened by the experience. Every step reminded her that the world outside the library carried lessons as profound as those within. The streets, the people, the small interactions, all were part of the tapestry she now understood more deeply than ever. That night, as she settled into her room, she placed the pen and the final book on her desk. The golden light from the street filtered through her window, soft and calming. She took a deep breath, feeling the exhaustion of mind and body, yet also the serenity of completion. And as she closed her eyes, she whispered to herself, "Good night. The library watches, but I am free." For now, outside, the town slept, unaware of the labyrinth of memory, truth, and sacrifice that had quietly shaped one of its residents. And somewhere, hidden between the folds of reality and imagination, the library waited, patient, eternal, and alive, ready for the next seeker, the next reader, the next story to claim. For Evelyn Ward, the journey had ended, but the lessons, the truths, the balance she had achieved would remain woven forever into the fabric of her existence, and into the infinite pages of the library that knows her